So let me apologize first of all for the mess. This is in a workstation area, so you've got all kinds of junk around it. But what I want to show off here is the modularity that's involved in the City of Jordoba Kickstarter, which has about 70 odd hours to run at this point, and hopefully this will bring in some more people who will be interested in it. First, just to show off the modularity of the incidental pieces. So for example, we can take the turret here and replace, completely changing the view of what's in there. I'm not going to bother to snap these in, but they do snap in. And if you want to glue them, obviously you can glue them, or you can keep them as modular pieces. I think people have different preferences about how modular they want something to be. And speaking of that level of modularity, you can see that these pieces that are the additional types of things that you can add in, some of these are from different painters, so they look a little bit different from each other, but the way in which these fit together is kind of at a large scale of modularity. You could have city pieces that come in 2x2 tiles, and for that you're going to be able to get perfect modularity. Here the goal is that for a city adventure, things tend to be, the exact dimensions of things and so on tend to be less important in a city adventure where you're trying to put things down quickly. So it's useful to be able to say, okay, here's my shape of my building, I want to just put it down here. And just to make a point, the internal areas in this can be connected with the peg-in doors, which you can glue in place, or you can just move them around however you want to do it. But this allows you to create an entrance from one area to the other. So these can be used as internal rooms as well as being used just for building facades. Depending on how you're running your city adventure, most of what I've got out here are the narrow pieces, and the reason for that is that they print more quickly than larger pieces. And so you can just sort of define really quickly just by putting out different things, the outlines of a street, for example. And one of the things to point out here is that all of these pieces, in terms of modularity, being able to build a street, build upward, however you want to do it, is the any of the blank faces on these walls can be placed flush with any other blank side and create what is essentially a wall. And because it's not showing up great because of the little bump that I've got in the map there, but you can create building sides by putting these pieces flush with one another, and that is what's good for creating the kind of labyrinthine maze-like cities that you would get. For example, there are a lot of them existing already in D&D Adventures. So, for example, the city in Chult in the Tomb of Annihilation, going way back in D&D history, the city-state of the Invincible Overlord. Anybody who is playing something in Lankmar, this is probably good for that. It has a very, very different feel to it than the kinds of peaked roof Tudor type buildings that are most common that you see in Kickstarters for city terrain. So just to point out, so for example, once again, the being able to put two things flush, put doors in between them, you can actually create a fairly complex interior. These would be hallways in most of the scales that people use, but you can create a fairly complex interior for the buildings. Or if what your focus is the movement along the streets or along the rooftops, these pieces are all essentially modular. And one of the things, just to point out, you can take, this one is snapped in, you can take one of the roof pieces and you can put it across a couple of pieces like this, peg it into place, and here what you've got is basically a 40 by 40 building in terms of its appearance, even though it's made up of a couple of different configurations of these walls. So we've had a lot of people ask about, for example, are the watchtower pieces going to be modular with the other pieces? And the answer is most definitely a yes in terms of doing that. So for example, we can create a sort of corridor building here, once again using the peg-in door if the interior of the building is important. If it's not, then it's not going to be an issue. And you can put the roofs for it. There are different sorts of roofs, so there is an element of picking what it is that you want to do. So for example, that would kind of cross this off. It leaves an open area, so that's not any good, but it just shows, you know, how it is, for example, that you can use different pieces in combination with other pieces to create something that's just incredibly complex and is great for having chases through streets. And of course the main thing again though is the flavor of the overall city, that it's got a more swords and sorcery, sort of more Middle Eastern, North African kind of feel to it. So with that, let me go ahead and draw this video to a close. I do think that that shows what it is that we're doing here, what the objective is with the Kickstarter, and how it's going to be used in terms of the modularity. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk later.